Hey everybody, my name is Spaz and I'm a CD junkie. On this episode of CD Junkie, I'm going to be discussing one of the greatest pop duos of all time. As you can probably tell by the name of this video, I'm going to talk about Carpenters, or The Carpenters. If you look at any of their album covers, they all say Carpenters, but we naturally call them The Carpenters. So I'll probably switch in between as the video progresses. But in every CD Junkie video, I like to discuss how I got into the band, and I will tell you now that basically it was a gradual thing because being of a certain age, I'm in my mid-50s, as I was growing up, my parents were listening to the radio or listening to records, and of course you'd always hear the Carpenters, especially starting with the Close to You album and the Close to You single. I have such vivid memories of hearing those things on the radio, and it was such a joyous experience because it was beautiful, it was wonderful, and that's how I sort of organically got into Carpenters. It was just through the years, hearing the hits on the radio and falling in love with them and falling in love with that exquisite voice of Karen Carpenter and those gorgeous, wonderful arrangements by her brother Richard. A lot of people don't realize it, but on those Carpenters recordings, they had a lot of the Wrecking Crew musicians involved, including like Joe Osborne, who played bass almost the entire time. Hal Blaine was on drums. Now, originally, Karen was a drummer, but they eventually moved her out front and made her stay out front. So as the albums progress, she plays drums less and less. But let's start with the first album. The first album, released in 1969, was called Offering, and it had a minor hit with Ticket to Ride. Well, once the second album, Close to You, came out, Offering was reissued with a new album cover and a new title. It was named after the hit. Ticket to Ride is the Carpenters' debut album. Offering, again, was the original vinyl release. I'm not sure if any countries has released this on CD as Offering with the different album cover, but it was released on vinyl. This, as I said, the biggest hit off of this was Ticket to Ride. Thing about this, Karen sang a lot of the leads, but Richard sang more leads on this album than he would handle in any other subsequent album. So this was a little different than your normal Carpenters album, but the sound was there. The wonderful harmonies, the layered production. There's so much depth and emotion to Richard Carpenter's production. A lot of attention is put on Karen's voice because it's amazing voice. Karen's voice. She is not only my favorite female vocalist, but she is probably up there right next to Elvis Presley as my favorite vocalist of all time. Such just warm tones and so much emotion. But then Richard's arrangements are beautiful, and they can be haunting and they can be joyous, and there's so much depth to them. If you really, really go back and listen to a lot of Carpenter's recording, a lot of it is really driven by his electric piano. It's sort of mixed down because they went back and re-recorded a lot more piano and layered stuff on top of it. But if you really pay attention, there's a lot of just this driving electric piano that just sounds wonderful. But anyway, let's move on from 69, the Offering Ticket to Ride album. We'll go right into 1970 with the big hit album Close to You. Of course, this was the album that has the title track, their first huge hit, but it's also got We've Only Just Begun, which is probably their signature track. Reason to Believe is on here, Love is Surrender. But one thing I want to point out real fast before I move on to the next album is if you listen to the album version of Close to You, it's actually a little bit longer than the single. It doesn't fade out like the single does. It has a false ending, kicks back into it, and then fades out. So it's kind of cool. It's probably another 30 seconds to a minute longer. I'm not exactly sure. But Close to You, the Carpenters' second album, 1970. 1971 brought the self-titled album, Carpenters. This album, you look at the track listing and it's a virtual greatest hits. It's got Rainy Days and Mondays. It's got Let Me Be the One, For All We Know, and of course Superstar. Superstar is one of the most perfect pop recordings ever. It's an amazing slice of audio love. And an interesting thing is Karen's vocal on that track, on the song Superstar, it's a first take all the way through. She never went back and redid the lead vocals because it came out perfect. one take, the very first take, Superstar, and that proves right there that Karen is an amazing, wonderful, expressive, emotional vocalist. Then in 1972, A Song for You. This is yet another album that just reads like a greatest hits. It's got, of course, the title track, but it's got Top of the World. It's got Hurting Each Other. It's Gonna Take Some Time. Goodbye to Love. I Won't Last a Day Without You. And it's got Bless the Beast and the Children on it. Song for You, 1972. 1973 brought Now and Then. Now and Then. Side one of the album is basically, a new Carpenters album, like with Sing and, their version of This Masquerade. Side two starts with Yesterday Once More, one of their finest singles. I think we can all agree with that. Then the rest of the side two is a rock and roll medley. One thing I want to point out about the song Sing, it's not one of my favorite Carpenter songs, but it is written by Joe Raposo, who wrote a lot of the music from the early Sesame Street, the first maybe 5-10 years of Sesame Street. And of course, I grew up on Sesame Street. I started watching it the first year, so I love his music. And the song Sing was originally featured on Sesame Street. So at the end of 1973, they released the singles, 1969 to 73. Took a little break, and then in 1975, comes the album Horizon. Horizon, biggest tracks off of this are Only Yesterday, Please Mr. Postman, and Solitaire. By this time, Karen really wasn't playing drums anymore. She was more of a front person. And then they were under new management, and they pushed them towards making TV specials. And Carpenters suddenly went from being a great pop duo to being more entertainers than crafters of songs. And I think that's when there was a little spark lost. Karen still sounded great. Richard's productions and arrangements were still great, but they were geared towards a different audience. They weren't trying to make hits anymore. They were more or less trying to entertain people. And in my opinion, there's a big difference. So in 1976 comes A Kind of Hush. This, of course, There's a Kind of Hush, which is the old Herman's Hermit song. I really think that they captured the melodic beauty of that song. Karen's voice actually brings out the melody even more than the original Herman's Hermits version. But also Can't Smile Without You, that became a hit for Barry Manilow. I Need to Be in Love, which was written for Karen, and it's ended up to be, I think, her favorite song, and it's absolutely a wonderful song. So anyway, Kind of Hush was 1976. 1977 brought The Very Strange Passage. This was their attempt to break out of the Carpenters mold. They were still very distinctly Carpenters because Karen's got that wonderful voice and Richard's very creative in his arrangements and stuff. But it's a strange record. I mean, they started the album with this African thing called Bwana She No Home. But then Sweet Sweet Smile's a great sort of country-esque pop song. All You Get From Love Is a Love Song is another great song. And of course, their version of the Klaatu song, Calling Occupants of Interplanetary Craft, was also fine too. Were they successful in breaking out of the mold and trying something different? They're very successful in trying something different. It wasn't that commercial, so it didn't catch on. And I think their old fans thought it was odd, and they weren't cool enough for the new wave fans in 1977. So that's really going to be up to you on how you feel about that particular album. 1978 brought the album Christmas Portrait, which is a wonderful Christmas album. Also, the singles, 1974 to 78, was released that year. And the Carpenters were on a short little break dealing with certain issues that we won't go into because I just want to talk about the music. But during that time, Karen wanted to record a solo album, and she had to beg and plead to get the permission to fly to New York and record a solo album with producer Phil Ramone. Phil Ramone used Billy Joel's band, at least most of his band, plus other session people, and they recorded Karen Carpenter's debut solo album. Well, the album was refused by the label and was shelved and did not get released until 1996, but we'll talk about that in a few moments. The Carpenters did return in 1981 with Made in America. This was a sort of a return to the classic Carpenter sound, but a little bit updated. But by 1981, radio wasn't playing Carpenters like music anymore. They were playing new wave or synth pop, things like that. And a band like Carpenters got lost in there. But the album does have those good old dreams and I Believe You and Touch Me When We're Dancing and Because We Are in Love, the wedding song. Those were probably the most popular songs on this album. That's 1981. And sadly, this was the last studio album released during Karen's lifetime. She died in February of 1983. The end of that year came Voice of the Heart. This features the last two recordings that Karen Carpenter did for the Carpenters, which is the song Now, and then another song called You're Enough. Then Richard went back into the vaults and pulled out some other things that they hadn't quite finished, maybe didn't fit on a certain album, and then he formed what was then known as a new Carpenters album. In 1984, he did the same thing with some previously unreleased Christmas recordings, and then they released an old-fashioned Christmas album in Christmas of 1984 that featured stuff that they didn't use on the Christmas Portrait album. In 1989, they released Love Lines, which was more unreleased Carpenters recordings. And a couple of the songs here were actually songs that she had recorded for her solo album. Richard sort of stripped them of the instrumentation, added new stuff, and made them sound more like Carpenter songs. But Love Lines, that came out in 1989. 1995 brought us Interpretations, a 25th anniversary celebration. On this collection, it's not a standard collection that you expect. Richard actually remixed a lot of these songs. There are a few classic songs here, and there's a couple songs that were never released, so this is the first time they're appearing. And then a majority of it was remixed in like 1994. There was like a couple songs maybe remixed in 85 or so, but this isn't a standard collection because, like I said, they are different mixes. So if you've passed this up in the past thinking, another hits collection, definitely check that out because it's worth your time. 2001 brought us, As Time Goes By, another collection of previously unreleased tracks. This contains some of the medleys that they did for their TV specials, but the medleys were recorded in the studio, so they're stereo and they sound great, and they basically mimed to them, or maybe she did a live lead vocal to them. But, it's nice, but it's also got previously unreleased tracks like Rainbow Connection and California Dreamin', and Close Encounters Star Wars medley. And then there's even a medley that features Karen and Ella Fitzgerald. So that's a very interesting release. Then this came out in 2018. This is the Carpenters with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. I usually don't like when they do these things, when they posthumously add strings onto somebody's thing. They did it with Elvis. They've done it with Roy Orbison. They've done it with the Beach Boys, even though they're not dead. They did it with Buddy Holly. I'm not really a fan of that, except this one I think is a little more legit because it's Richard who actually conducts the orchestra. And this is, by the way, this is the Target version with the bonus track. The orchestral work on this is subtle, and it actually works very, very well. He even adds some musical interludes between some of the songs, linking them together. But this is a nice collection of songs. I think a Carpenters fan, or maybe a new fan that wants to hear what the fuss is all about, check it out. That's Carpenters with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. Now, I've skipped a lot of the compilations because there's a lot of compilations out there, like this, for example, singles 1969 to 81. It is a nice collection. It's great, but there's 2 CD collections. There's 3 CD collections. There's just a lot of really good compilations. If you want to go out and investigate the Carpenters more, I would recommend practically any compilation. But I've got a few more releases here to discuss, including the Karen Carpenter solo album. This album eventually, was recorded in 79 and 80. A&M Records turned it down, and it just sat on the shelves. But they went back in and they released it. I believe there was like 21 songs recorded, but 11 made the album. and it was produced by Phil Ramone, like I said, featuring a lot of Billy Joel's band and a lot of other great session musicians. Rumor has it that when she was going to New York to record the album, Richard told her, no disco, don't do disco. And guess what? About maybe a third or a half of the album is very disco influenced. The thing about Karen Carpenter is that she didn't have a lot of confidence in her own voice. She had one of the most amazing voices ever, but she wanted to sing like Olivia Newton-John. She wanted to sing like all the people she heard on the radio. She didn't think she had a great voice, so she tried to emulate. She was singing in a higher register, and it isn't as successful as the Carpenters. I think that Richard understood her more than Phil Ramone, although Phil Ramone was a great producer. I don't think that they mesh together. But this is nice for a listen. It's not up to Carpenter's quality, but that's just my opinion. I know a lot of other people will feel different. A few more things here. This here, Reflections, it's another compilation, but the reason I'm highlighting this is because this is a compilation of lesser known tracks. So there's not really any huge hits on here. And there's a big handful of them that are remixed. So they're going to sound a little different. So this might be something a Carpenters fan passed on before, but might want to pick up. Then there's the Essential Collection, which is a 4 CD box. And this contains a lot of recordings pre-Carpenter, so you're going to hear some of the combos that they were playing in before they became the duo that we know and love. And there's some remixes and oddities and rarities in here, including Karen's theme, which Richard wrote specifically for that TV movie of the week film they did in the earlier mid 80s about Karen Carpenter. But yeah, this is a great little collection. I've got Carpenter's Gold. This is a 2 CD DVD set. So you can buy the Carpenter's Gold separately. You can probably buy the DVD separately too. It's got a lot of their videos. But it's a great collection. Sounds great. Sounds wonderful. But anyway, that is it. I appreciate you hanging out with me for a little while as I blab about the Carpenters. My name is Spaz, and I'm a CD junkie.